how can you get crypto in general, but blockchain technology overall into society for the, as just discussed, adoption, increase the interest there. It's about bringing it where the masses are as of today. And in Europe, that's football, European football, meaning soccer. And that's in Switzerland with FC Basel, where we are main shirt sponsor since last week as Bitpanda, but we also sponsor in Germany FC Bayern Munich, or in France, Paris Saint-Germain and AC Milan in Italy, for exactly that use case, to bring people crypto quite near and to increase mass adoption across the European market.
This next crypto firm just announced a partnership with FC Basel, begging the question, what similarities do sports fans and crypto degens have? While sports fans might not be as technologically savvy, our next guest says the partnership represents mass interest and adoption. Joining the show now to discuss crypto markets and adoption in Europe is Bitpanda Deputy CEO Lukas Enzersdorfer-Konrad. Lukas, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jen. Great being here.
Of course, now I ask everyone who joins Markets Daily this. What are you watching recently from a markets perspective?
Sure. I think if you are in crypto, you always have to watch two different things. On the one side is macro, right? What's going on from a geopolitical perspective and in the broader markets in general. And on the other side is, I think, the technological advances within the crypto industry, what different market players are doing, and especially how institutional adoption is proceeding forward, especially now in 2025.
Let's talk about what's going on from a macro perspective. I mean, from where you're sitting as Deputy CEO, what are you watching for when it comes to what's going on in the economy?
Sure. So first of all, I think we all have seen that crypto is still, or nowadays, very correlated to traditional financial markets. So for us, I think in the crypto space, super important to watch on the one side what's going on a large scale in the US, but also beyond in Europe and in Asia in that regards. And I think that we've seen over the last couple of weeks due to the tariff and potential tariff war in that regards, a lot of uncertainty in the markets. So that uncertainty on the one side is simply driven by what's going to come next and how is the US government and other governments from Europe, from Asia and China actually reacting to the different aspects and views on tariffs in general. And I think currently everybody is quite feared that now we'll see with Q2 numbers later this year, potential recession incoming into the US. And why? A potential recession also means potential inflation increase in the US. And as everybody is quite eager to see some interest rate cuts from the Fed. If you compare it in Europe, the ECB is continuously cutting rates down over the last couple of months. The last year, that's not yet there in the US, and potential inflation risks are also decreasing the chances. So June will be quite interesting.
Now, yeah, you're right. I think we have some interesting times ahead. Like you said, the ECB has cut rates, I think, 7 times in a row. We are going to hear from the Fed on Wednesday. Talk to me about how you're watching what's going on in the US markets and how you're applying that to your strategy in Europe.
Sure. I think crypto in general, right, quite broad, and for sure, it's especially a global market compared to probably stock markets, which are still a little bit more geographically distributed. European stock market versus the US one, having some different, at least, nuances over the last couple of weeks. Crypto not, right? That's one market. I think therefore it's much less driven by geographical perspective. So Bitpanda, based here in Europe and being a market leader across different European markets from a retail perspective, like investors and users of our platform are very driven by the overall crypto market sentiment. So I think there we are still quite on the fear side, a lot of uncertainty also therefore in the market still. Bitcoin definitely above 90K US dollars. And therefore, I think holding up quite good and stable in that regards.
You know, I want to zero in a little bit more on what's going on with crypto in Europe right now. We talk about the US so often on this show. What trends are you observing when it comes to adoption from an institutional perspective and also retail perspective in Europe?
Sure. I think what we definitely have seen in Europe since the beginning of the year, due to one main reason, regulatory clarity. In Europe, there is a law called MiCA, which is nothing else than a clear regulatory framework for banks and financial institutions about how to deal with crypto. And also market participants from the crypto industry, like Bitpanda, now it is fully regulated by this license regime, can suddenly deal very, very clearly with banks. And that's not only in regards of how banks or can accept crypto companies, but it's even more. Across the whole European continent, banks are looking into how can they offer crypto as an asset class for trading and investing to their end customers. So mass market retail use cases suddenly offered in banks. And we as Bitpanda are supporting these banks by offering our infrastructure and white label services so that they can power that. Good example is Raiffeisen, one of the large Central Eastern European banking groups, where they already started last year offering buying Bitcoin and 500 other different crypto assets directly in their online banking connected to their main bank account of the end customer. And I think that's, you cannot get as near as that in regards of fiat on and off ramp. So from a crypto perspective, that's adoption, right? And I think Europe here is currently ahead of the US simply due to regulatory clarity.
It's so interesting. You talk about the on and off ramps being made easier, the user experience being made easier. Talk to me about how that translates to user adoption, because I remember looking at some stats probably a few months ago now, and Europe was kind of low on the list of countries that were seeing more people interested in crypto, more people adopting crypto. And honestly, Lukas, I think it's because probably the financial system probably works a little bit better in Europe than some of the other regions that we're seeing more adoption. So talk to me about what you think needs to happen to see that adoption, and if those stats I read actually resonate with what you're experiencing.
Sure. I think if you look across European markets, you currently have around about 15% of society, between 10 to 15%, being invested into crypto or have already invested into crypto once. However, there are quite large differences between probably Eastern European countries, on the other side, Germany and France being very, very already mature in regards of more and more mass market retail customers getting into crypto. I think in general, also it's clear Europe or crypto for Europe, it's an investment. It's a high risk, high yield asset class, and it is an investment case, right? There are other countries on other continents where it's much more a payments case, a remittance case, secure fund and store them from a value perspective case due to high inflation on the local currency. That's not the case across the European market. Here it's really about first the underlying technology and what is possible with that. Tokenization, for example, stablecoin use cases, but also crypto as an asset class, which has a clear place in a diversified portfolio with the theory of between 1 to 5% of portfolio allocation as part of that. And this is what we definitely see across Europe, more and more coming across retail investors.
You know, you mentioned real world assets there. You mentioned a little bit about how institutions are viewing crypto earlier on in our conversation. I want to dig a little bit into that because, you know, we talked about it on this show yesterday, but real world assets and tokenization are really becoming the narrative that's driving the industry right now. There's always one kind of clear narrative that's bubbling up. Talk to me about how institutions in Europe are looking at crypto. What kind of infrastructure are they looking at? And is it accelerating as quickly as it might seem it's accelerating in the United States?
Yeah, the main use cases across the European financial services landscape, and especially in continental Europe, I think the UK still is lagging a little bit behind due to the not yet there regulatory framework for banks. So that's definitely still missing on that side. But what we see is three different categories or use cases. One is crypto as an asset class to be offered and added to their banking service portfolio as an investment brokerage type of business for retail customers, for private banking, high net worth individuals, but also for corporate clients, also mid to large corporates investing into Bitcoin, adding into the treasury via their local bank. Second one is in regards of tokenization of, for example, derivatives issuing and other financial instruments. So to really bonds, for example, bond tokenization, a couple of different use cases are already live and out there. Siemens, for example, large German company tokenized and issued a tokenized bond of their company already over the last couple of months. So that's definitely a use case which trial and error is currently being done out there. And last but not least, as you also stated, real world assets and the tokenization of underlying assets which potentially are not yet traded or that liquid. That's something also the European industry is exploring, but there are not yet any use cases there where you say, okay, at large scale that worked already quite well. A lot of pilots, but not yet, I would say, on a fully production level. Security tokens, for example.
When you think about crypto in the European continent, is there something you think we're not talking enough about? Is there that story that's really bubbling up in Europe, but it's not making the headlines?
I think it's more an observation. And the observation is how the industry will merge together between banks, neobanks, fintechs, but also crypto companies when that regulatory joint framework suddenly is available. And this is what you can see playing out in Germany, in France, across the European market already very well, where suddenly, so to say, every institution is adding crypto somehow into their offering. And the interesting part is how will a world look like where there are not just some crypto companies out there offering you access to that asset class, the technology and blockchain technology, but literally every bank around your country. And that's a very interesting aspect because suddenly I think adoption then suddenly is there, right? And everybody can get into it. So it will be much more than regarding Web3 and on-chain use cases in the future once that access problem is completely solved.
Lucas, what needs to happen to get there?
I mean, first, in the US, clear regulatory guardrails, right? Also for the UK, for example, and other markets, what we already can see is in every region where this regulatory clarity is there and suddenly this landmark is reached. Good example is also the UAE with Dubai and Abu Dhabi, where they also have clear regulatory guardrails since more than 12 months. You also see exactly that adoption. Banks suddenly getting into crypto, launching their own offerings. So I think you simply see once market gets mature, then you get into mass market adoption, which also requires exactly that regulatory clarity. But once there, actually you really get crypto across the whole society.
Now, I want to talk about some news that was announced recently. Bitpanda became FC Basel's shirt sponsor. And where I want to start the conversation about this is, why is that sports audience so interesting to you?
Sure. I mean, if you are sitting in the US and watching the European market, you would say soccer. In Europe, it's called football, right? But soccer is for the Europeans what American football or baseball actually is for US people. It's a mass market, and therefore it's not so much to saying, okay, it's a sports club or it's a certain sport. It's literally society, right? And how can you get crypto in general, but blockchain technology overall into society for the, as just discussed, adoption and increase the interest there. It's about bring it where the masses are as of today. And in Europe, that's football, European football, meaning soccer. And that's in Switzerland with FC Basel, where we are a main shirt sponsor since last week as Bitpanda, but we also sponsor in Germany FC Bayern Munich, or in France, Paris Saint-Germain and AC Milan in Italy, for exactly that use case, to bring people crypto quite near and to increase mass adoption across the European market.
Is there something about sports fans that is kind of similar to the degen nature of folks who like to participate or like to dabble in crypto?
Honestly, I think there are some similarities, but not a lot. For example, sports fans are not typically very technology savvy, while crypto degen and OGs are. They're in because from a technology perspective, super interesting. It's much more about where can crypto get us as society. And in any adoption curve, doesn't matter which industry or technology, you get to that point where you need to adopt the next 25% to get into that mass adoption. And I think we're exactly in that phase across a couple of different European countries on the European continent. Therefore, sports fans are important as they can bring that mass adoption for crypto.
And tell me a little bit about, I guess, the education piece that comes on the back of that, right? You just mentioned not all sports fans are maybe as technological savvy as some of the degens or OGs in the space. Once they become aware of the Bitpanda brand by attending a football game, how do you imagine them then becoming part of the Bitpanda ecosystem? And what are you doing to help them understand the ins and outs of crypto?
Sure. So first of all, as you just exactly mentioned, it's a lot about education. It's about how can you create financial freedom, what is needed in that regards, how does crypto work, what is on-chain activity, and you need to combine it all with educational content and content pieces, but also on the other side with easy to use user experience. So I think compared to probably where our industry has been 2, 4, 6 years ago in regards of user experience, we nowadays are much more in a world where we need to produce Web 2 experiences to cover Web 3 use cases. And I think that's exactly needed for the target group, but also what the industry is going after.
All right, Lucas, and just before I let you go, if you had to pick one trend that you think is going to dominate the rest of the year, what do you think that trend is going to be?
I think from a technological perspective, for us here in crypto, you will see one thing. The infrastructure, the layer ones and layer twos are built. Now it's time for the applications on top of it. So I think what we'll see is a paradigm shift from infrastructure building to use case building, and to hopefully finally see great Web3 applications and easy to use experiences to interact with that. So that's something I think which was already quite visible over the last couple of months in Asia, now also at Token 2049 in Dubai. And I think we'll see much, much more about that over the next couple of months and hopefully until the end of the year.
Lucas, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for joining Markets Daily today.
Thank you.